Um, Next up, we have Tami Vogel. Tami is the Executive Director of Wildlife Rehab Center in Roseville, Minnesota. Wildlife Rehab Center was founded at the University of Minnesota in 1979 as a student club of the Veterinary College. From those humble beginnings of just a few dozen animals admitted each year, WRC has grown into the world's busiest wildlife hospital, admitting more than 18,000 patients annually. It is known worldwide for its work with lead toxicity in trumpeter swans and turtle shell repair. Approximately 200 different species will come through WRC's door this year alone. Tami spent her childhood exploring nature, and that foundation set the course for her life. Passionate about the natural world, she enjoys camping, fishing, hiking, snowshoeing, traveling, and is a federally licensed master bander. Her history at WRC ranges from initially volunteering in multiple areas to revamping the intake process, creating an off-site call center to better assist clients on the phone, creating WRC's brand and communicating it with various audiences, and developing programs to keep wild babies in the wild with their families. When not at WRC, Tami can be found enjoying her backyard birds and extensive gardens, exploring the outdoors with her dogs, and reading. Welcome, Tami.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to see many familiar names here. I will go ahead and share my screen.
Looks great. You just need to put it. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I will say that there are two recordings in here that have sound on them. I did remember to check the share sound box, but they may be a little bit soft in their voicing because we do require everyone who's working with animals to wear masks. So during those, you may want to pop your volume up just a little bit. I'm here today to talk about window strikes, and I feel like I'm preaching to the audience who needs to hear this the least of anyone, because you all love birds so much. But we thought it'd be interesting to go through kind of what WRC sees, and some of the species that are affected and what we can do to avoid them. So this little kinglet is a window strike, and he came in a box, and we took him out of the box and we took a photo of him for a project that I was working on, and then we realized what the box said on it. And we had to chuckle, because ideally that's our goal at WRC, right? Just like that, headache gone. So a little bit about WRC. We are an independent nonprofit. We don't receive any state or federal funding. We broke off from the university in 1997, formed our own 501c3. In 2002, we moved to Roseville. We do not own the land in Roseville. We lease that land from the city, which means that we are very limited in what we can do for outdoor caging. So in 2019, we purchased a 22-acre farm in Grant, Minnesota, which is just east of White Bear Lake. And we have extensive outdoor caging there, and we are getting ready to build a large rehabilitation campus there. Our public presence and our hospital will remain in Roseville. It's going to be final stage rehab that's going to be out at Grant. We are a full working veterinary hospital. We have DVMs, we have vet techs, we have vet tech assistants, we have med assistants. We also have a full rehab staff. We have a very small admin staff. Nearly all of our dollars go into animal care staff. So, of course, our window strikes peak during migration. So this is just a stat from last year. And the reason I wanted to share this stat is because you can see how important it is to participate in the Audubon bird walks. During peak migration, they will have a week where they go out and they search for window strike birds who are on the ground in the cities. And you can see that it almost doubled the number of admits with people just simply looking for the birds. We can't save all the birds. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it sure is better than them, slowly dying on a sidewalk. We've even had bats come in that have hit windows. Okay, so here's some more stats. Let me move this so I can see. So we've had more than 3,000 window cases or window strikes since 2011. Spring migration last year was down a little bit than 2022, but still amazingly high. Spring, we tend to see not as many birds, and I suspect that's, for me anyway, it feels like spring migration is spread out just a little bit longer. And we only count spring migration window strikes from April and May. So right now we've already had 28 window strikes in this year. Talk a little bit about power lines, but not too much. I'm mainly going to focus on window strikes here. We do hear a lot of people say, they find a swan on the ground that can't fly, or a pelican. And oftentimes people say, oh, that likely hit a power line. I will say you're going to know if a bird has hit a power line. They tend to shear things off of birds, and they give them just horrific injuries. So if you find a fairly uninjured larger bird on the ground, it probably didn't hit a power line. So you can see window strikes, 147 different species. We just added, it was 146 until last week, but we just added a Bohemian waxwing to this list. They can be your common backyard birds, and they can be migrants. It is true that when migrants are moving through and they may stop for your bird baths, things like that. They aren't as familiar with your yard. But we see a lot of the everyday common backyard birds because that's what people are finding. So you saw the junco in the earlier picture. He had what we call torticollis, where his head was kind of messed up and he was holding his neck stiff and backward. That is a sign of neurological damage. And this is a yellow warbler. You can see he broke his bill. You can see the bomb bill is cracked there. And he's also presenting two other pretty clear signs of window strike. Number one is the squinty or swollen eyes. And number two is, and you'll see this throughout the presentation, kind of that extended leg. We see that a lot, and all of these are signs of neurological damage. So if you think of a window strike, basically it's a really bad concussion. So your backyard chickadees fly around 12 miles an hour. Robins can fly up to 30 miles an hour. So if you imagine yourself driving in a car at 12 miles an hour, and when you hit a wall, it's not just your car that hits the wall, it's your head that hits the wall. If you can imagine the damage that would be done from that, that is what your birds are experiencing when they hit a structure or when they hit a window. Mortality rate is very, very high for window strikes. Even in a hospital with trained physicians, we still have an incredibly high mortality rate. And that is due to the extreme internal damage that is done. So I listed just a few things here. We will actually see GI systems that have been totally disrupted from the impact. But think of it as a really severe car crash. We can repair some things. That's what our vets are trained for. So beak injuries are challenging, and we're finding more that with birds that have broken bills or beaks, they oftentimes have a fractured jaw. And those fractured jaws are much more difficult to treat. We can't repair joints, especially in birds. Number one, they're just too tiny. Number two, a joint just kind of dissolves when those little tiny bones break. And so the jaw has some pretty sensitive joints in it. And as you can imagine, in a bird, very tiny. So for the fractured jaws, if we can stabilize them at all, we do our best to try to have them heal. If a beak is broken, sometimes we can repair it. If it's sheared off, or if the tissues become necrotic, we cannot repair that. And in that case, we do humanely euthanize the bird. But this is our vets working on a beak of a cedar waxwing. And then American woodcocks are coming through right now. You've probably been hearing them. We had our first one come in about a week ago, and they oftentimes ulcerate their eyes when they hit buildings. I don't know why. I suspect it's because with that long bill of theirs, they hit the building, they graze the building and turn sideways, but we often find ulcerated eyes. Thankfully, the ulcers heal fairly quickly. And then speaking of flycatchers, down on the lower right, that's one of my favorite birds. That's a great crested flycatcher, and he's got a wing wrap on. Okay, this is our first video, and it is a bird that has hit a window. Just move that around.
I'm Dr. Amanda Rappaport at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Minnesota, and I'm going to walk you guys through a common yellow throat physical exam. So always kind of doing a visual exam on all our patients to make sure what they're doing. And immediately on our visual, we're to the side and we keep trying to roll it around. As you can see, we go upside down. That's not something that we want to see typically in our patients. This is a female common yellow throat. So these guys are migrating through this time. Okay. So I always like to start looking at the head to make sure if our eyes look abnormal, we have any trauma there. And then I'll go immediately into listening for a lung sound, such as crackles, to see if we have blood in our lung fields, and to see if they have any harsh breath sounds. They're a little bit stressy here, so I'm going to start to hear some sounds. We have a little bit of what I call crackles. So because this bird was brought to us from a collision, I suspect we have trauma within our lung field, and so we have maybe pulmonary hemorrhage. And then kind of going through our orthopedic exam. She is reactive to me touching her clavicle, kind of extending her shoulders and kind of just feeling for anything. Ooh. She is a little feisty about it though. And then feeling her scapula is right here. You do have some laxity in our scapula. So a lot of times with these guys, we can treat any kind of bony fractures, maybe like clavicle fractures, especially with window strikes, but what we're most concerned about is all the head trauma they can get. For example, this patient is kind of becoming laterally recumbent, and she wasn't moving. As you know, she was rolling earlier today. So this would be more of a permanent to severe neurological damage associated from head trauma from a window strike. So right now we're going to do the best we can for her and take away her pain, and we're going to humanely euthanize.
So the reason I chose this video is because this is standard presentation for birds who have hit windows. They may look good in a box. They may be fairly active for 10, 15 minutes, and then they quickly go downhill. And if we were to necropsy this bird based on the lung crackles, I would suspect that we would find the bird was hemorrhaging and bleeding internally, and they quickly die. The birds that don't die, we can do our best to try to keep them and get them into treatment, but they oftentimes tend to die that first night. And again, that's just because of massive internal trauma. We try to make our exams as quick as possible because the more stress on the bird, it elevates the heart rate and more quickly can distribute blood through those areas. The birds that pass away overnight, when we've done necropsies on them, like I've said, we've oftentimes found that their GI tracts are completely separated. We have found brain bleeding, internal hemorrhaging. So I wanted to include this case study because this is a really good example of the extreme trauma that can occur when a bird hits something. And this pelican actually, we believe it hit the side of a house. And get to the video here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Allison Carter, and this is my technician Ash, and we're doing a recheck exam on the pelican that you may have seen on our Facebook a couple days ago. What we found in our initial admin exam is some abrasions on his beak, so we're just going to look at those. They look pretty good. And then we always want to check on these guys, how their feet are doing, because they like to be on a lot of, and his feet look really good. Alright, and then I would like to see him walk around if we can have him walk around now. Alright, so we're just assessing how active he is and how willing he is to ambulate. He's not very willing. Alright, we can catch him and give him his medications.
What does that mean?
So with this guy, we know on exam we were suspicious that he had hit something because he has the abrasions on his beak, which you can see, and then some damage to his feathers. But he doesn't actually have any external trauma. And we actually found on radiographs that he does have separation of some of his organs. So his liver and his heart should sit like this. And on radiographs, they're actually sitting like this because he was hit so hard that his organs moved. So it's probably painful, and he feels pretty bad. So we're controlling him with pain meds. We want him to continue to feel better and be more active and more willing to walk around. And then the other thing we found was that he has a high parasite load, which most of them do have parasites because they eat fish, which have a lot of parasites. But with him feeling debilitated, he's not able to control that parasite load. So that's actually the medication we're going to give him. It actually coats his stomach where some of the parasites live. So we're going to go just right down in his throat, and then we're going to flush it down. Try to get it all the way down. Alright, and that will coat his stomach so we hopefully will feel better and want to eat even as we kill those parasites. So now Ash is going to take him back to his house, and I'm going to take you and show you our radiographs, which is how we diagnosed his trauma.
I see someone's breakfast is waiting for them.
Yeah,
Ooh, looks tasty.
looks really good. I love some of those berries. So this is our digital radiographs, which is an invaluable tool for us. Like I said, we didn't really find a lot on his exam, but right here we can see these are his radiographs, and this is a different pelican. And right here is the heart, and this is the liver, and like I said, they should sit like this normally. Like you can see here, they kind of blend into each other. But with really big trauma, it hits those apart, and then the air sacs, which are basically everything else, will go in between and fill in, and that's this black here you can see. And that's a lot of trauma. You can imagine this is a really big bird. To move his organs around, that's a lot of trauma.
And he didn't break any bones
and
from
he
that?
didn't break any bones.
That's amazing.
Yeah, birds are adapted to have these strong bones for flight, so it's really amazing, and hopefully we can support him through this and control his pain. But these radiographs, without this radiograph machine, we wouldn't have been able to diagnose that.
So what will happen? Will
So he did fully recover. And this is him at release down on the Minnesota River. And it's just a credit to, I think, birds. Wild animals are programmed. Their one goal in life is to survive and reproduce. And this bird had massive internal injuries, managed to survive for a number of weeks before they were able to capture him and bring him to us. He says he survived more than 2.5 months in treatment and then lived to release. He hit the side of a building and no exterior injuries other than those scrapes to his bill, but internal damage. I wanted to include ground collisions too, because it's spring and we see most of our ground collisions at this time of year. You may think to yourself, what's a ground collision? And it's when diving birds or other birds like coots fly over an area and for some reason or another they land. Typically, we see this in large parking lots after it's rained. And if you think about it a little bit, a large blackish parking lot that's wet, has water on it from way up above, is going to look an awful lot like a body of water. These birds land and tumble, and then they realize they're stuck. They can't become airborne again because they need water for takeoff. So at this time of year, we oftentimes ask people to keep your eyes peeled, right? You see a grebe or a loon, a coot standing in a parking lot, and that bird isn't going to go anywhere until a Good Samaritan helps it out. We typically like to have those birds brought to us, even if you don't see any external injuries, because they can fracture their keels and they can have some type of head trauma that you may not notice right away. So please do bring those to us. Our goal is to examine those birds as quickly as possible. And if we find that they are uninjured, we release them that same day so they can continue on their journey. Then there's all sorts of other types of collisions. Human world meets wild world, and oftentimes it's not a good meeting. So these are just some other things that patients have come into WRC after colliding with them. So. And then this is the project that I was working on earlier. So this talks about window strikes, and I think all of us are familiar with the plight of birds. Many species are in decline. We know about window strikes, but what I find most heartbreaking is what these birds have gone through, and then all of a sudden they hit a glass window, and that's probably it for them. So I'm going to just zoom in here so you can see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So we had to do a general estimation of miles. We looked at their central territory and then where they were found, and we did the math. But this is what I find heartbreaking. Look at how far these birds made it on migration back to Minnesota, only to hit a window. And I think that's heartbreaking. These little tiny birds make this incredible journey, and the plate glass just stops them in their track. And you can see here some of those extended legs that I was talking about, the torticollis being prone on their sides. All these are signs of neurological damage. And I do have this graphic available. If anyone wants to include it with anything, I'm more than happy to share it. Just let me know. So then what can we do? None of us want to have bird deaths. So you've probably are all familiar with this photo or the photos that came out of Chicago last year after the mass event in Chicago. There's a couple key things that we can do. If you work for a company that leaves their lights on at night, and most companies, believe it or not, do, and mainly that's for the cleaning crews that come through, ask them to turn them off. It saves energy for one thing. And I wouldn't even ask them to turn it off just during migration windows. I would have them do it all year round. I live out in Afton, and I drive by 3M on a regular basis, and 3M started by turning them off during peak migration. And now they leave their lights off year round, which I think is just fabulous. So that's one thing that all of us can do, is ask your employers to turn the lights off at night. 2 to 3 story buildings should have some type of decals or striping pin dot patterns on the exterior windows. So your local libraries, your kids' schools, they should all have some type of marking or etching on their windows to prevent window strikes. These are our favorite ones that we share at WRC. But there's a couple key things about these that some people forget. They have to be placed on the outside of the glass, not on the inside. And you do have to change them at least twice a year. If they become gritty or dirty, the UV doesn't react as well to them. And then eventually the UV just breaks them down. For my own purposes, I just change them out in March and September. And the migration season is what reminds me that I need to change them out. They're inexpensive, they don't disrupt your view, and they're very easy to put on. I will remind you all, and again, I'm speaking to one of the most knowledgeable groups on this, but you are not going to prevent all window strikes at your house. I think that's very important to acknowledge because people will oftentimes put these things on their windows,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they still have, 1 or 2 window strikes, and they're just heartbroken, and they feel like they weren't succeeding. When a predator comes through your yard, sharpshin, Coopers, cat, whatever it happens to be, your birds are going to do a panic flush. And some of those birds are going to hit windows when that happens. They are not going to see these UV reactive decals in time to turn away. So what you're trying to do is eliminate the day-to-day mistakes that birds make. But keep in mind that the predator flush birds will likely still hit windows. And then what to do if you found a bird. We'd like you to, as quickly as possible, contain it into a box, put something in the bottom of the box so the bird isn't sliding around in there. It can be a crumpled piece of paper towel, it can be a pillowcase, ideally not a washcloth or an actual towel that has little terry loops on it. We've found birds' tongues caught on those. We've found, especially the birds that are more neurological, if they're going to start to spin, they can really wrap themselves in those loops, which is obviously unhealthy for them. So we prefer like a pillowcase or crumpled up paper towels. Immediately get it into a dark, quiet area. Reducing stimulation is key. And we also don't want the bird on heat. For a long time, people were recommending birds with trauma go on heat to try to help reduce that. But just like concussions, heat increases blood flow, which is exactly what the bird does not want. Hummingbirds. Hummingbirds go hypoglycemic very quickly. If you have a hummingbird that you have found on the ground, the first thing you should try to do is get it to feed out of a feeder. If you don't have a feeder and you have hummingbirds in your yard, I can guarantee one of your neighbors has a feeder. So walk around, find your neighbor that has the hummingbirds coming to her feeder, and then slowly guide the bird's bill into a feeding port. Let the bird feed for a little bit. If it had just become hypoglycemic in your yard, it should perk up really quickly, show zero neurological signs, and buzz away. If it doesn't do that, it most likely did hit a window or it is sick for some reason. But what you've done by letting it feed is you've given it the glucose that it needs before it gets to WRC to make that trip. And then the very first thing that we do when they come in is we feed them. We also prioritize hummingbirds. So if you come in to our facility with a hummingbird and it's, May, June, July, and we have a line out the door, come on up to the front of the line and let us know you have a hummingbird and we'll prioritize that. And of course, if the bird is banded, report it to the BBL. Here's what I was talking about for no heat. And by the way, all these photos are taken at WRC. These are all birds that have come in with window streaks. And then I just wanted to mention that we are incredibly honored to participate in the photo arc with Nat Geo photographer Joel Satari. If you're familiar with the photo arc, it is a marvelous project. WRC has about 163 different species in the photo arc. But if you love birds and you just need to see some beautiful bird images, I highly recommend going to the photo arc. And then we'll pick up on Bob's talk and think you all know what this bird is, but anyone want to take a guess? I agree with Bob. These are one of my favorite birds. Their markings are just incredible. And if you ever get to hold one in hand, you'll be stunned. For a simple looking brown bird. It's a Lincoln sparrow. We are open every single day of the year, even holidays. We are open 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you need to keep a bird overnight, keep it in that same box. And then before you make the long trip to us, take the box outside and open it up. If the bird had passed overnight, you saved yourself a trip from coming to WRC only to arrive with the DOA bird. If the bird did die overnight, keep in mind that it's due to catastrophic injuries, and you getting it to a vet wouldn't have saved that bird. So I know it's very distressing to find a bird that's passed overnight, but you are not responsible for that. The bird had catastrophic injuries. And then that's all I had. Does anyone have any questions?
Tami, thank you so much. That was difficult to watch in part, I have to say. We are running kind of late and there are some questions in the chat. If you wouldn't mind checking that out and maybe responding to those questions in the chat. And I wish we had more time. We were going to have to schedule these a little bit longer next year, but thank you so much. So helpful to see this, even as difficult as it was. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.